Welcome to Principal Center Radio, helping you build capacity for instructional leadership. Here's your host, Director of the Principal Center, Dr. Justin Bader.
Welcome everyone to Principal Center Radio. I'm your host, Justin Bader, and it's my honor to welcome to the program Dr. James Stronge. Dr. Stronge is the Heritage Professor of Education in the School of Education at William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and he's the president and CEO of Stronge & Associates Educational Consulting. His research interests include policy and practice related to teacher quality and effectiveness, teacher and administrator evaluation, and teacher selection. He's worked extensively with state departments of education, school districts, and national and international educational organizations to support teacher and leader effectiveness, and he presents and consults extensively throughout the United States and internationally. He's the author of more than 30 books, including Smart from the Start, 100 Tools for Teaching with Confidence, which we're here to talk about today.
And now, our feature presentation.
Dr. Stronge, welcome to Principal Center Radio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you, Justin.
Well, I'm excited to speak with you and learn more about your thinking about what it takes to succeed as a teacher, especially at a time when so many new teachers are coming into the profession. We have had just such a sea change, such a round of turnover in the last couple of years, or a wave of turnover, that we have so many people who need support, who need assistance starting off on the right foot. What were some of the things that you saw happening in the profession that informed your work as you both decided to write this book and then actually put it together?
Let me give you the immediate answer, the short answer, and then perhaps back up and give you a little more context for what led me to just even imagine Smart from the Start. And the imagination, it was really a concern that came about for an issue that you alluded to. Consider how many new teachers we have coming into the profession. Historically, in America at least, we've had a relatively normal curve for teachers entering and teachers leaving, with a continued growth somewhere between the 10 to 25 year range, where we hit the high points on that normal curve. But in recent years, that's changed. It's much more bimodal, where there can be even a slight dip in the middle years and a higher number of teachers turning over, teachers deciding to leave. And when those teachers leave, that creates a real growth spurt in new teachers coming on. So we have this bimodal distribution with a lot of new teachers in schools populating every school every year, and with the expertise in the buildings just departing. That's a really challenging circumstance for schools to succeed. And related to that, there's greater turnover in the schools that have the greatest needs. There's heavier turnover in low-income schools, in urban schools, exist in, say, suburban schools. So that's one of the reasons. And then there's a second reason that made me really think about this and be concerned. And that is, with the new teachers who are coming on board, they're not staying on board. They're departing us too quickly. A lot of new teachers today apparently are not seeing education as a lifelong career. They'll come in, they'll get a degree in teaching or something comparable, come into teacher education as a classroom teacher, and maybe stay a year or two and then decide to bail out and go do something else with their lives. Every time one of those teachers turns over, every bit of the investment that we've made in recruitment, selection, induction, development walks out the door with that new teacher, and we start over. There are a lot of statistics, Justin, about teacher attrition for young teachers. It's estimated, for example, with some studies, one specifically from the National Center for Educational Statistics, that within the first 5 years, cumulatively, about 35% of new teachers leave, just simply leave teaching. Another 35% are movers. They're going to move to another position, another school, somewhere else to work. When we combine those two, that's a 70% attrition rate for the expertise that we had in the classroom. And that's frightening. So given that kind of experience that schools are dealing with, we need to do something to help new teachers survive and thrive. And that's really the genesis of the book.
And as you mentioned just a moment ago, it's not that those new teachers are spread out evenly over all schools. They're concentrated in the highest needs schools, and that turnover is just perpetual in a lot of schools.
It's like a revolving door in some schools, and that's been true for a long time. One of the factors that is different today is that the turnover rate everywhere is higher. For example, when very recent data have been broken down about teacher turnover in terms of Title I school status, that is, high needs schools versus non Title I schools, there's a difference with higher turnover in those higher needs schools, the Title I schools, but there's just a heavy turnover everywhere. For example, with teachers with 3 or fewer years experience, novice teachers, there's about a 28% turnover rate in Title I schools and about a 22% turnover rate in non-Title I schools. We have too many teachers leaving the classroom, leaving the profession, and new people coming in and taking their place the following year, and them being completely novices.
I started my teaching career more than 20 years ago in a Title I school, and I remember very distinctly how many veteran teachers there were, right? There were a lot of people who had been there a long time and were going to be there a long time. And of course, like in any school, you have people who are just absolute rock stars, 20, 30 years of experience and just really the pillars of the school. You have other people who, maybe are a little bit more burnt out, but there was that core of expertise. And, as a new teacher, you kind of figure out who to go to and who's just going to vent right back to you if you need help. But you're saying that that core of experience is not there to the same extent that it once was. Talk to us a little bit about the kind of mentoring aspect and the role of that expertise.
Certainly, there's expertise in our schools. That's what instructional coaches provide, principals, assistant principals, and perhaps even more importantly, the classroom teacher next door. But when we hollow out that experience, when those individuals with the experience leave, to whom do we go for help? I remember, just as you did, Justin, in my first year of teaching, being lost and needing help desperately. The principal couldn't provide all the assistance that I needed. Consequently, I turned to a teacher in my department, in my area, and I would go to him over and over, probably to the point that he dreaded seeing me coming. But he was such a source for me, such a resource to help me even survive that first year. I don't think all of our new teachers have that latitude today. And what that means today is what it's always meant. Mentoring counts. Mentoring is important. And with us knowing that as school leaders, that we're going to have a large influx of new teachers and not as much support from colleague teachers, we have to be prepared to provide mentoring. This is a really interesting issue. And if you don't mind, I'll take just a moment and give a little bit of a sort of a statistical review of how principals relate to mentoring. And what I was thinking about specifically is a fascinating study that was conducted actually 10 years ago, but it's still really quite relevant. And the study looked at how principals spend their time at work. There have been a lot of studies similar to this. And most of the findings in the study are really quite comparable to what I've seen. I conducted a study like this in Illinois many years ago and found something that looks like this. But what the breakdown ultimately comes out to be is that principals spend slightly less than 13% of their time on instructionally related activities. 87% of their time is spent on everything else that they're assigned to do. If there's a cockroach in the girls' locker room, you take care of it. If there's a leaky roof, you take care of it. If someone's mowing the lawn outside the fifth grade wing when the kids are taking a test, you take care of it. That curriculum time you had planned always doesn't play out the way that you had anticipated. 87% of the time, which is probably too high, is spent in non-instructional activities. But here's what's interesting to me. Within that 13%, slightly less than 13%, when we look at the total workday, total work week, about 5% of the principal's time is spent on classroom walkthroughs. And guess what the effect size is for a classroom walkthrough? The short answer is that it's zero. There's a zero effect size. It doesn't hurt anyone. but it doesn't help anyone either. All that time spent in walking through a classroom, there are other viable reasons to do so, and there's other value in doing it. But to improve teaching performance, it doesn't seem to work, not by itself. And the reason is a walkthrough is merely data collection. What has to happen are two additional steps to improve teaching. One of them is coaching, which you just asked about, the mentoring, the coaching. Guess what percentage of time principals spend in their daily routine on informally coaching teachers? And it is very small. The answer is 1/2 of 1%. 0.5% of time is spent on teacher coaching. And yet, the effect size for coaching teachers is 0.58, almost a zero point 0.6. That's an exceptionally high effect size. Walking through doesn't get us anything, but when we combine walking through or observation with feedback, quality, insightful coaching, mentoring, help for teachers, all teachers to get better, but especially new teachers, it has this enormous effect for good. And then there's a third element that's necessary, and that's follow up. I can't simply say, Justin, get better and give you some advice immediately. I have to follow up with resources, support. Perhaps come back in and say, Justin, I'll be back tomorrow and we'll co teach this lesson and we'll practice this skill and we'll do whatever it is. There's no substitute for mentoring. There never has been. But in today's world, a school, a classroom, a child will not flourish without it. So I think you hit the nail on the head with your question about the value and the viability of mentoring. That's a long answer and a long way around getting to it, but it is to say in our principal preparation programs and in our principal practices, we must highlight helping teachers grow and get better, and especially new teachers.
Very well said. And if I'm not mistaken, the study you're referring to is Jason Grissom, Susanna Loeb, and Ben Masters' study on principal time use.
That is correct.
And our colleague Daniel Willingham actually wrote about that study when it came out in the Washington Post. So anyone who's interested in learning more about it can read it in Dan Willingham's own words. Just Google that and you'll find it on the Washington Post website. Really powerful study, and really one that was formative for me in thinking about what classroom walkthroughs need to look like. And really am a big believer in the non-data collection walkthrough, the walkthrough that leads to conversation, that leads to the kinds of support that people need, which is not necessarily having a checklist or a form filled out about them. It's probably something else entirely. So one other big issue that kind of serves as background for the book is the idea of the learning curve, right? It's, part of the reason that turnover is such a problem is that teaching has such a long learning curve, right? Where teachers are learning new skills, and before they can really be fully effective, time has to pass, skills have to develop. What's your sense of how long that learning curve tends to be?
Fairly long, but to be a little more specific, there are some estimates, and I don't know the source for this, but that for any complex profession, it can take up to 10,000 hours of work time to reach mastery. My older daughter is an MD. When she first started, she certainly did not know what she knows now. It takes a long time to develop the expertise that's required, and teaching is a complex profession. I mean, if anybody doubts that, let them walk in off the street and try doing what an effective teacher does. Teaching is rocket science. When you consider you have all of these different young people, children coming in every day with different hopes, dreams, aspirations, abilities, capacity, interest, inclination on any given day, it is a challenging job. How do you teach a child to read? How do you teach a child to understand math at a higher level? How do you help children learn how to use AI? How do you, and the list goes on and on. What we do know for certain, Justin, is that the learning curve is exceptionally sharp in the first 3 years, 3 to 5 years even. It depends on the study. After that period of time, the influence of experience begins to mellow or fade away, and you can't distinguish the teacher effectiveness based on years' experience. So, somewhere after around year 5 or so, teachers start to get their sea legs. They start to be able to stand upright and to be more effective and be able to anticipate what's coming and deal with surprises, which are going to occur on a regular basis in a classroom. So what that means very practically is then that first year, the second, the third, those first few years, teachers are vulnerable. They don't have the skill set that they need. I'll give you a simple personal example. In my first year of teaching, when I'm a history major and an English minor, and I was given a homeroom of seventh grade students, and the boys in one class, girls in the next class, and I thought it was possible to teach the way my history professors taught. I came in prepared, knowing history, to lecture those seventh graders about the era of history that I was teaching. You can't lecture to seventh graders.
And what could be more fun, right? If you love history, yeah.
Exactly. I liked it. But there was only one of us in the classroom that seemed of that persuasion. I knew after about half a day I was incompetent. And the problem was I only had one tool in my teaching toolbox. And it took me a period of time to reach a level where I was competent and confident enough to help my kids learn. I mean, I learned a lot that first year. I'm not sure how much the students learned, but that's so very typical of what a new teacher, a novice teacher encounters. If we combine that, Justin, with the fact that our teachers are turning over, they're just turning in the keys and leaving after a year, or in some instances, even before the year's out. We're in that same boat every year, and teachers never get their sea legs.
And I think back to the idea of surprises, and being able to anticipate. I think one of the parts of the book that may actually be the most useful or the most used for people is actually the table of contents, because it gives you a little bit of a roadmap. And when I first cracked open the book and read through the table of contents, I had this feeling of walking into a new school for the first time and getting a sense of the physical layout. Like, where is the office? Where is the copier? Where is my classroom? Where's the custodian's office? Like, there's this mental map of things that we need to know to succeed in this work. And the table of contents really serves as that map, including to some things that are hidden to us. Back in the 70s, Lordy talked about the apprenticeship of observation, and how, especially as new teachers, we learn largely from the teachers that we had, and hopefully from our preparation as well. But when we act based on what we saw our teachers do, of course, we didn't see a lot of those invisible keys to success that are not visible to students. Like, as students, we don't see the planning that teachers do. We don't see the relationship building and the thinking that they do behind the scenes and the assessment. So all of those kind of invisible dimensions of teaching, I often talk about them as kind of an iceberg of practice, right? There's some elements of practice that are visible above the surface, but there's a great deal that is not. How do you envision people using this book kind of quickly, knowing that there's a lot to cover, there's a lot to learn, and the book is just loaded with tools, we should say. This is not one of those books where it's just a giant block of text and every chapter is 10,000 paragraphs. There are lots and lots of tools, things to think about, things to kind of quickly prepare. Take us into kind of how you envision both teachers and those who support them using it.
Well, first, I'm very happy to know that you found the table of contents helpful. I think that's a smart place to start, and it really reflects what I had in mind originally in designing the book and then when our team wrote the book, which is this is not a text heavy book that you simply read through from cover to cover and put aside and take away a couple of key findings. Instead, it's intended to be a resource guide that teachers can keep handy and instructional coaches, mentors, principals can. And then when a teacher is encountering an issue or before, if they can anticipate an issue arising, go to the book and look for guidance. So, with that in mind, we organize the book as this resource. There are 30 chapters in the book organized within 6 key sections, and that shows up in the table of contents as well. We actually started out with 52 chapters, and because there's so many important things that new teachers know, but we decided that's overwhelming. So we intentionally cut back to what we felt were the most salient, necessary tools that teachers need to use in getting started in those first 3, 4, or 5 years. And with that in mind, we built chapters that are very practical. They're solidly founded on the best research we know. I always write from research to practice. But this is not a research text, and it's not just a text with my imagination or our writing team's imagination. It's built on the best evidence we know of what works and what's proven to be effective for teachers. And then we built the content around it. For example, the first section in the book is getting ready for the start of school. As you pointed out, Justin, there are a lot of things behind the scenes that kids and parents aren't aware of. How do you organize the classroom? What are the options for how you organize a classroom? How do you prepare for the first day of school when the students are going to arrive? What do you do to get ready for that? How do you prepare an introductory letter for parents? What do you do to create manageable learning goals and classroom rules and regulations? How do you deal with that? And that list goes on within 30 distinct topics that are interrelated around getting ready for the start of school. Second area that we laid out is one that teachers and principals identify over and over as an area of need for teachers who are still learning the craft of teaching, and that's classroom management and learning environment. There are very specific concrete aspects. Designing a classroom that's well managed, that's robust for learning. It has academic freedom in it for students, but yet it's structured in a way that's efficient. How do you do those things? If you haven't had that in your repertoire, you don't know how. Then we move into an area that is absolutely hidden, and it's instructional planning. And we weren't thinking about a planning form, but we're thinking about what goes into the best plans that lead to the best teaching, which in turn lead to the best results for kids. We then move from planning to instruction, and this is the place, quite honestly, we cut back on. We identified the areas of instructional practices that we felt novice teachers could benefit from the most, and also a section on engaging students in learning. There's so many good instructional tools, and maybe that'll be in book Smart from the Start, book 2. But we focused on the fundamental skills that new teachers need. Can't be like me and simply come in thinking they're going to lecture. What else can you do? What works and how do you do it? And then to assessment, you alluded to assessment. And then there's an issue that's neglected sometimes, and that's finding yourself in the classroom. How do you find satisfaction and joy in the classroom so that you want to keep coming back? And we devoted a section specifically to that. If a novice teacher runs out of energy and hope, that person's going to leave the profession. They're going to bail out. We don't want to see that happen. So, with this in mind, we built every single chapter with the same protocol. Very short section on why we know this is important, what the evidence tells us, maybe a page or half page. And then we move into how you do it. And then we move into tools that you can download, use, copy, put into place right in your classroom. If we can help new teachers, if this book will help new teachers find an easier route to success, then we've succeeded. That's its intent.
Yeah, I love the practicality and the research. And I guess this is kind of a lingering question behind the scenes, but I'll just kind of ask it directly. I wonder if you could help us situate your book in contrast to two types of books that everybody is familiar with. One is Harry Wong's highly regarded First Days of School, which focuses, a lot on routines and procedures, and I think has saved the bacon of generations of new teachers, and certainly was a very helpful book to me. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about kind of how you see this book comparing. And I would also love to hear your thoughts on the research, because I've observed an alarming trend in some, I would say, very well-selling books that are being published in our profession now that have a curious feature. And that feature is that if you flip to the back of them, you will find that there are absolutely no references. And I was kind of shocked the first time I read one of these books, and I thought, this book is making a lot of claims that seem a little bit suspect to me. And I flipped to the back to look for the references, and they just weren't there. So help us think about those issues, if you would.
I like your question, Justin. And I've thought about both of these issues specifically. First, for Harry Wong's book on the first days of school, I think we need to give him credit for pioneering a book that addresses this big concern. Anytime a new teacher comes into a classroom, they can benefit from the kind of practicality that's expressed in Mr. Wong's book. And so I recognize that and value that. That's why it held up for generations. What I aimed for in this book is the same audience, but with a different approach. And it's the approach that I decided to take, I always take, is to ask myself, what do we know works? So it's not just forms, procedures, it's not heavy on scholarship, but it will present only things, only information that we know that work. And then I turned to very specific forms and formats that teachers can upload or they can photocopy for their use immediately. Why do you need to create, in your own words, a brand new letter for parent open house? Why couldn't we provide you with a template for that based on the elements that we know that we've seen that are important in that kind of letter and allow you as the new teacher to modify it, make it your own? So it's a deeper dive into what teachers need. It's not a book you just pick up, read through it in an hour and put down. It's a book that has a specific chapter on a specific topic that a new teacher is going to need, or a coach is going to need to help that new teacher. You go to that source and you use the source. So it is more comprehensive than, in my view, than what Harry Wong did. But again, I acknowledge the really good work that he did by opening, acknowledging this need and addressing it in an initial way. My hope is that in this contemporary time, school principals, school leaders, and school teachers will find this the go-to resource that will help them. So that's my view on the first question. The second one, when I did exactly what you just described, Justin, this week, I took a new book on classroom assessment, flipped through it, went to the back and looked for references, and there may have been a half page or a page of references. And I can't believe it because everything that's in that book, let's say it's 120 pages, is from the imagination of the author. It may be good imagination, but it personifies a problem we have in our profession. How can you be a profession if you make up everything you do? Would we like to have doctors, medical doctors, working on us who just make up everything and there's no rich research to guide their practice? But we do that. We experiment on kids all the time. And when I find a book like that, I'll put it aside. It may be good opinion, but it's opinion. I want to know what works. And that's what I aimed for in this book. It's what I aim for in every book. If you look at any of my books, the qualities of effective principals or qualities of effective teachers, flip to the back and check for references. And you're not getting my word for things. You're going to get what we know works. And that's what new teachers need. So I'm very much sort of on the opposite end of that, just sort of storytelling book with no evidence behind it.
So yeah, the book is absolutely loaded with both research and very practical tools that teachers can put to use right away. Talk to us, if you could, about how you envision principals, assistant principals, instructional coaches, and new teacher mentors using the book to support the teachers that they work with.
There are two ways that come to mind specifically. One is to use it as a resource, just as teachers would, although I think it would be much more expert use of the book than what the novice teachers have. Sometimes you don't know what you need to know. But when you have a mentor and an instructional coach, an assistant principal of the school who has that rich, deep experience, they'll know in pretty short order some of the needs that their novice teachers have. And with a resource like this, instead of saying, well, what should I do? How do I help that teacher? I know the problem. Maybe I'll have them go watch the teacher next door. That doesn't work well, not in every instance. Instead, be able to say, this teacher needs help with this aspect of classroom management. Or if they planned differently, they would be more prepared for walking into the classroom each day. They'll be able to then go to the book, pull out that section, spend a few minutes walking through it with that new teacher, showing them what to do, and here are the forms on how to do it. So it becomes a resource for instructional coaches to help them be better instructional coaches. That, I think, is a major use, in some ways more valuable than even the novice teacher having it and pulling it out. I want novice teachers to have this. They need the resource. They need the support on their desk. But the kind of depth that a principal, an instructional coach can provide in having tools to use like this, I think will make and can make the book invaluable. At least I hope so. That's one way. And then there's a second way that's a little more indirect. Almost every school in America, almost every school in the world that hires novice teachers will have some kind of onboarding new teacher orientation. They do it sometimes district-wide. There will also be induction within the school. There'll be various ways to help those new teachers onboard successfully. And the better job we can do with that, the fewer problems we're going to have down the road, the more successful those teachers are going to be 6 weeks or 6 months from now. So in thinking about the new teacher orientation, rather than making it homemade, build it around the concepts that are built in the book. We've begun with my consulting company to provide a lot of training for school districts on new teacher retreats, new teacher orientation, getting teachers ready. And I don't mean that everything from beginning to end is in this book. It's not. But it's a valuable resource that can help systematize the kind of informal or even formal training that we've been providing for new teachers. And with that in mind, in fact, with both of these, new teachers need help. They need our support. And if we can use this, if principals can use this resource in one or both of these ways, then I think we just further our teachers and help them succeed and stay with us.
So the book is Smart from the Start, 100 Tools for Teaching with Confidence. And Dr. Stronge, on that last point, if people want to get in touch with you and maybe talk about some support in training and inducting new teachers, I think a lot of districts have people coming in without much training. Maybe they have alternative certification, maybe they have no certification, or maybe they just need support after their certification program to succeed. What are some ways that people can work with you and your organization to partner in thinking about how to approach those support needs?
Justin, we have specific components built for supporting new teachers. And we also have training included in the component on how to be a better mentor, how to support new teachers as a mentor. And there's a series of offerings that are available. You can go to our website, which is Stronge, STRONGEAND, Associates, all spelled out, .com. Go to our website and take a look. And then also feel free to just email me at my company email address, and I'll direct your email to one of our team members who is heavily involved in this. Dr. Rachel Ball would be the likely person that would get back in touch with you. But you can send the email to me, james.strong, E on the end of strong, at strongeandassociates.com, all spelled out. And we'll respond very quickly if we can help you.
James, thank you so much for joining me on Principal Center Radio. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for this wonderful service and best wishes.
Thanks for listening to Principal Center Radio. For more great episodes, subscribe on our website at principalcenter.com/radio.